everybody. I'm really delighted to be with you all. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Sunita Narayan, and I'm joined here with all my colleagues from CSC's climate team. They are all headed to Belém very soon. But as the world meets at COP30, we wanted to present to all of you an agenda that we have been working on for some time. And we will also share with you some of the concerns we have on how the world is moving ahead with this very critical existential issue of climate change, an issue which is bringing devastation to large numbers of people in our world, and an issue in which we need to move ahead. The question that we are asking today at CSC and presenting to you is that to move ahead, we need a new narrative. We need a new idea and a practice so that we can keep climate change at the center of the development action that governments take. And this is the agenda for today. And it's something that we are very excited about because we want to present it to all of you. And we hope that we can take it forward in the months to come so that we can build a much better understanding with all of you in terms of what and how we need to keep climate action at the center of development. So with those words, let me introduce my colleagues and then ask for the release of our reports, and then I will take it forward with our presentation. So first, Avantika Goswami. Avantika leads our work on climate change, and which we have been working on. As you know, CSC has a long legacy on climate action, focusing on the need for equity, focusing on the need for ambition. But what we are doing now as part of this team is to present to you new ideas on how to take forward this work. So thank you, Avantika, for the work you do. Trishant Dev, many of you would have known his work on the carbon markets, and which has really helped us to understand how financial flows have to happen in our world. Trishant has now been taking the work forward to look at global trade issues and try and understand them much more clearly to see what needs to be done. Seher Raheja. Seher has become our in-house expert on finance. Not that there is much money around Seher, but nevertheless looking at what needs to be done and how do we rework how do we keep a forensic eye on what's the amount of money that is coming in to make the transition happen, what's not coming in, and then what are the ways in which countries are coping with their indebtedness, with the lack of funds, and on the other hand, with the kind of impacts that they are devastated with. So thank you, Seher, for that work. Rudrat has done amazing work, which we will present to you today on the question of commodity trades, because clearly for our part of the world, one of the biggest issues that will become important is how do we increase economic resilience from the natural resources that exist in our world. And what is going wrong with the trade and with the capital flows in which we are not able to maximize from that, and then, of course, be able to build resilient economies and the welfare for our people. So that's really the package of people, ideas that we will present to you. But as I've promised, today is only, in a sense, a snapshot of what we have. And we will keep bringing these ideas to you so that we can work together. But before I move on, Avantika, can you now can you put up the cover so that we can release all the reports? And so as you will see here, We have 4 reports that we are releasing, and we are going to put them up on our website so you can all take a look at it. And I hope you will find it useful and will join us in this new mission to change the narrative of climate action. So the first report is Towards a Green World, which gives you the overview on what's happening in the world and what is the agenda. Then we do deep dives into the agenda. One of the new pieces of work that we are bringing to you is on agriculture and forest commodities, really trying to understand what is it that countries can do to benefit more from the natural wealth that they are custodians of. And then, of course, is the big question of our world, the critical mineral issue, the rare earth issue, the question about supply chains, and the question about the green transition and how it will happen. But with that is linked is a paper on clean technology manufacturing, really again trying to understand what can be done so that you can have economic resilience in countries along with green transition. And this we believe is critical because as we can see in the rest of the world, and particularly the rich world, if you do not have a vested interest in or an economic resilience from the green transition, there is enormous hesitancy. We are seeing that with the electric vehicles in Europe. We are seeing that with many other things. So we need to understand how the global South can have a different pathway moving ahead. So this is really the package of reports, and please join me in releasing the reports today. And again, thank you, team, for this. Thank you. Wonderful. So let me then present to you our findings, our overview, which I will do, and then I will hand it to Avantika and my colleagues. I'm going to keep my presentation short today. It is something that helps you to join the dots, connect what the remaining reports are going to present to you. But I want my colleagues to have the maximum time to be able to present their findings. So my work today is easier. It is like orchestra manager to be able to give you the parts of the symphony that you will then understand. So firstly, let's be clear. And this is something we've put forward in our report. This is a time of great disorder, great disruption, and great discord in our world. The question that we are asking is that from this great churn, can the world's poor emerge stronger, more resilient, and more secure? And the agenda that we are presenting to you tells you that it is possible. But it requires reworking of the development model we know in our world. We need resilience and we need sustainability. And this is the global agenda for the South. Now, if you look at the world today and the world around you, there are competing trends. On one hand, we know that climate change is real, impacts are devastating, large parts of the world. We also know that greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. Both the IMO report, the WMO report recently about the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and now the UN report, which says that the world is definitely off track, and we are moving towards 2.5 degrees centigrade rise. And that is bad news. But on the other hand, in spite of the fact that we know that climate change is urgent and it is devastating large numbers of people, there is global hesitancy to move ahead, both at the speed and the scale needed. But then there is also the fact that renewable energy is growing. And last year, the good news was that it has overtaken coal as the primary source of electricity in the world. Electric vehicles are growing, and last year, 20% of the new cars sold were electric. We know China is leading this transition. But on the other hand, China is also investing in new coal. So the question that we have in front of us in all these competing trends is who will win? What will win? The urgency to act in the face of mounting climate threats or inaction driven by economic interests. And this is why we believe that our agenda setting is critical. We need to win. We need to win on the side of the planet. We need to win on the side of people. So, what will make that happen? And this is therefore the agenda that we are putting forward to you on towards a new green world. So, firstly, and I will not get into details on this, but I want to flag these, and the details are in the report. One, we are seeing a trend where climate change is being discredited. And this is being done with deadly intent. This is not a fluke. This is not just a few rants here and there. The idea is to appeal to large numbers of people in the world who feel they are being economically deprived, to appeal to people who and mix up agendas of immigration, of loss of livelihoods, and climate change to make sure that you have a regime change moving away from policies of climate action to climate denial. But simultaneously, it is also important for us to take stock and understand that globalization, the whole free trade model to stitch together the economies of the world, has not worked for prosperity or planet. It has definitely had winners, but there are large losers in the world. And the losers are also in the rich world. And that's really part of the resistance and the resentment, the revenge of the rich, as we call it, against actions to combat climate change. We also have to dismantle or deconstruct the question of consumption. On the one hand, consumption is the huge consumption of countries like the rich countries, particularly the US, is what is making the world use it as a marketplace. But it's also giving the US the heft, the power to be able to redesign the global trading system in its favor. We also know consumption is bad in terms of emissions. The question now is, how can we have consumption, which is an indicator of economic growth, actually work for the planet and for people? That's really what our agenda, again, is about. And the fourth part of the great disorder, as we put it, is really the impact on the poor. How the impacts of climate change are visible, they are painful, they are devastating, and they are exacerbating poverty. They are making the poor unable to cope, and therefore migration is increasing. And this in turn is leading to global insecurity, not just of the poor, but also the rich. So these are really, as we say, the trends that we can see in the world, which we have put together as the great disorder. The question then is, what do we do? And the agenda that we are presenting to you today, which my colleagues will detail out in the reports that we have done, is number one, we need a clear understanding that for the countries of the South, we cannot have decarbonization without economic resilience. That inclusive and affordable development is critical for economic resilience. These are the two messages that we believe are critical. We have to bring these two agendas together. We know that growth, if it is not inclusive, cannot be sustainable. And we know that sustainability is critical if only if we can get economic growth to be tied to it. So this is really where we are saying link the two super cycle agendas, growth and climate change. Let's be clear, it is in our interest to achieve this twin goal. Our countries are most vulnerable to climate change impacts. And we know if we do development differently, we avoid pitfalls of marginalizing actions designed solely for climate change. This is very important because if you design actions only for climate change, we will not get the kind of public acceptability that is required to make sure that these actions, even if not convenient, even if not easy, will be sustained. This is why it is critical for us to bring these agendas together. We cannot afford in our world to allow climate change action to be seen as left agenda or elite agenda, or really the question of unaffordability. For us, these agendas come together. And that is why the most critical issue for us is what we call the co-benefit agenda, so which is rooted in development, that is inclusive and so sustainable. That to us is the bottom line. I won't get into details on this, but because you've heard me talk about it many times, and we will continue this. But you know that when we deal with air pollution in Delhi, we know that we cannot have clean air unless we redesign mobility for all. In India, we are not interested in electric cars. We are interested in electric mobility. When it comes to our industry, we want to have circularity built in to the hard-to-abate sector pathways because resource efficiency, energy efficiency is important for us in terms of our development. It reduces the cost of decarbonization as well. Similarly, when it comes to energy, we know that for us, it is affordability which is critical. And therefore, it is not RE for RE, it is RE for energy access. The clean energy transition for us is the great leapfrog, which takes the poor out of no energy, dirty energy, to clean energy. And that's the pathway for us that makes sense for our energy future to be secured. The second part of our agenda that we are suggesting globally is it is urgent that we resolve the geopolitics of green technology adoption. And we say this because, for the last 20 years, 30 years, we have talked about climate change, but we have always asked that what will be the technologies that will work? What are the viable technologies, the cost-effective technologies that will replace fossil fuel in our economies? The question has been, what technology? Today, we know the technologies exist. We are seeing them being scaled up. We are seeing that they're viable. They're also cost-effective. The question is not a technology question. The question today is geopolitics. And we can't avoid this question anymore. We can't evade it. We can't brush it under the carpet. We know that this question has to be confronted. China, we know, has absolute dominance, near absolute dominance over the supply chain on materials and technology. The critical questions today are, as I said, number one, we know countries need economic stake in the green transition. And this needs domestic manufacturing and job creation. Today, Europe's car industry is losing out to the EV vehicles, which are Chinese made. Now, you can say the Europeans were late in terms of putting together the green transition, but that is a fact. And that industry is critical for Europe, for its economic growth. So will European politicians be able to turn their backs on it or not? What will they reinvent as their economic stake in the green transition, that is critical. Same with India. India, we are investing in our remanufacturing because we believe, rightly so, that we need domestic industry, we need domestic jobs. But will this work at scale given the supply chain constraints? There is also the fact that today, and given the last 2 weeks, issues where there was restrictions on the export of rare minerals, the world is spooked, and there is wariness about the investment in green tech. But there is also the reversal of this, that China today has the largest stake in the green transition. They have the industry, they have the supply chain, they need this to work. Now, will this be then the factor that will bring the geopolitics together? What will be this new compact? We need to understand, but we need to talk about it, and this agenda is critical. Let's not brush it under the carpet. So this report that my colleagues will present to you on critical minerals gives you a state of art, but also how can countries move up the value chain. And this then is linked to the agenda on resetting the trade and finance rules for localization through value addition. As I said, for us, the question of economic resilience is critical. Economic growth is critical. Today, we know that the finance rules work against the green transition as the cost of capital is high. Climate finance is adding to the indebtedness of the poorest, most vulnerable countries. But the data that we are bringing and the research we are bringing to you is also about how global trade rules are working against global localization, against value addition and economic resilience of commodity-dependent countries. So this then becomes a critical agenda as we move ahead, because we believe that localization, local growth is going to be critical. The opportunity, we believe, is to rethink these rules so that we can have distributed, local-led production systems that become the basis of green industrialization. We know in India that the more money we can put into the hands of the poor, they will invest in improving their environment. If the poor are poor and marginalized, they will discount their environment. They will discount their water and land resources. And this will make the environment challenge even greater. We cannot have the poor being lectured to in terms of the need to avoid deforestation. We need to find enabling ways in which commodity-dependent countries can benefit from the tree wealth they have. And this then becomes the agenda moving ahead. And this, we believe, is critical because the real project, the objective of everything we have is the great leapfrog. Jumping to clean energy systems without going through the fossil fuel route. And this is the agenda that we believe is going to be critical for our world. So thank you very much. And I will now turn to my colleague Avantika, who will take you through the research that we have done. These are the three reports that we will present to you. Avantika, please.
Thank you so much. I will just share my screen in a minute. Okay, hope my screen is visible to everyone. Thank you so much, Sunita ma'am, for that expansive world reading, which really kind of explains why we did this particular set of research and why we felt so motivated to look into some of the pathways that we've examined in these three papers. I must add that what Sunita ma'am has not mentioned is that Towards a New Green World is actually a play on Towards a Green World. It's a publication from 1992 by Sunita Narayan and CSC's founder, Anil Agarwal. which back then set this framing for looking at environmental governance through the lens of development. So don't separate environment and development. And it's really one of CSE's seminal publications. And today we are trying to apply the similar, I can't say the same, but similar lens to the climate question. So bringing together climate and development. So very grateful to that the kind of vision that CSE has had many, many decades ago. Um, so in this paper series, essentially our motivation was, given a lot of the macro trends that Sunita ma'am has identified, we really wanted to come back to the question of, so what happens to the global south, to developing countries, to LDCs, small island states, even large emerging economies in this global green race and this turbulent geopolitics. And this is where we've kind of narrowed down to this examination of the fact that you can't really ask for decarbonization. We should never have asked for decarbonization without economic resilience to accompany in the analysis. So, this is where we're really hoping and wanting to reinvent the climate agenda for the global south. Calling for decarbonization without economic resilience is no longer viable, because what that will do is just simply reproduce inequalities in the old fossil incumbent world in the new green world. And what we actually need is to help the global south to be empowered to actually capture greater value, diversify its economy, and shape governance of emerging green industries. So the new green world should not carry forward the same problems of the old brown world, so to speak. So we have selected three strategic sectors to look into. We believe these sectors are not only, in a sense, crucial for the green transition, the climate transition, they are also in the middle of all of the turbulent geopolitics of climate. And they also, in the case of sectors like agricultural and forest commodity exports, are very vulnerable to climate impacts. So we have examined how these three strategic sectors are the sectors in which structural inequities in global trade and finance regimes actually trap developing countries at the raw material stage, while advanced economies, now advanced economies plus China, capture value through processing and innovation. So, this is a trend we've noticed across all of these three sectors. And what we are calling is for a large scale green industrialization that is rooted in ideas of diversification, localization, as Sunita ma'am mentioned, strategic resource control, and of course, a massive overhaul of global trade rules as well as the global international financial architecture. So, the hope is really to explore climate compatible development pathways for the global south through these three pieces of work. So, without delaying any further, I'm going to get into we'll get into the first paper that we've published. These will be on our website very soon, and I'll request my colleague Rudrat Avinashi, who is the author of this paper, to walk us through our examination of raw commodity dependence for agriculture and forest commodity exporting countries. So, Rudrat, if you can take this forward.
Yes, thanks, Avantika. Can we move on to the next slide? Yes. So the foundation of our first discussion paper is a stark global imbalance. 95 out of the 143 developing countries are classified as commodity dependent by UNCTAD, which is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Now, this heavy reliance on primary commodity exports, particularly agriculture and forest products, creates extreme economic vulnerability caused due to volatile price fluctuations, which is further exacerbated by the devastating impacts of climate change and inequities in the global trade regime. Now, as you can see in the graph, a research has found that the average revenue from the exports of manufactured goods as a share of a country's GDP was 1.7% for the selected agriculture and forest based commodity dependent countries between 2021 and 2023, while it was 23% for the selected agri based developed countries which reflects the structural imbalance in the global trade regime. Next slide. Thank you. Now, the inequity that we are talking about in the global trade regime is best seen in the value chains of agriculture and forest commodities itself. Despite being the primary producers, developing countries capture only a fraction of the final product's value. For example, Ivory Coast and Ghana produce over 50% of the world's cocoa beans, yet they account for a mere 6% of the total exports revenue from value added products like chocolate and cocoa powder. In contrast, downstream actors such as the manufacturers and retailers capture majority of the profit, often taking up to 80 to 90% of the total profit margin, let's say out of one dark chocolate bar. This structural inequality exposes farmers to rising production costs in the backdrop of climate change while denying them access to higher earnings. Next slide. Now, critically, commodity dependent countries suffer a disproportionate burden from the climate crisis. During 1993 to 2022, over the last 30-year period, the top 10 agriculture based commodity dependent countries had 24 times more affected people per 100,000 people from extreme weather events than their agriculture based developed counterparts, particularly for whom agriculture products remain the dominant commodity exports, although the developed countries may not be commodity dependent as well. Similarly, the commodity dependent countries had 9 times higher GDP losses than their developed counterparts during this period, as a research found out from the data of German Watch. Now, with regard to trade, tariff escalations by the developed countries has been a powerful lever to maintain their hegemony over manufacturing. Tariff escalation is a policy where higher import tariffs are placed on value added goods, while raw materials face lower or even zero tariffs in order for the developed world to safeguard their domestic industries that manufacture consumer goods. In this context of existing vulnerability, new trade measures, often disguised as an environmental policy, are creating further challenges. For example, unilateral trade measures like the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which is postponed for now, imposes significant financial and administrative burdens on developing countries so that they can comply with the due diligence. Next slide. Now, moving on from uh, what could be the pathways to value addition, these case studies illustrate that moving up the value chain requires coherent policies, state support, and targeted interventions. I'll speak about two countries here, Vietnam and Colombia, which also has the graphs as you can see in the slides. In the case of Vietnam, the country transitioned from exporting raw timber to diverse processed wood products, which increased export value through investments the country made in plantation forests as well as payments for forest environmental services scheme. As you can see throughout the years, not just the revenue, but the diversity of products in Vietnam increased. Now, Colombia added more value to its coffee by adopting on-farm wet processing as the primary handling method for coffee production. This was further complemented by marketing and branding of this company called Juan Valdez, representing Colombian coffee growers through national level federation. There was also certification programs and direct support for small farmers through guaranteed purchases at publicly declared base price. Now, all of these factors led to an average increase of up to 8% in Colombia's coffee exports since 2001. Next slide. Yes. So, what would be the way forward? And with regard to how we navigate the new green economy, Global South countries need a comprehensive approach that targets development, trade, and climate resilience, as mentioned by ma'am. And this can be done through certain key considerations, especially for agriculture and forest-based commodity-dependent countries. First would be economic diversification, which must be both vertical, that adds value to the raw commodity, and horizontal, which means that we need to broaden the export portfolio into non-commodity sectors such as manufactured goods. For example, Costa Rica successfully shifted a major part of its exports from coffee and bananas to manufactured medical instruments. Second, countries need to adopt to climate smart agriculture practices to enhance resilience and productivity, and this can be done by promoting climate resilient crops and intercropping systems. Third, it's important to establish fair and structured frameworks for technology transfer and knowledge sharing. This access to expertise and new technologies is crucial for enhancing manufacturing as well as value addition. Also, in the next point, strengthening regional cooperation by leveraging existing regional trade agreements such as the African Continental Free Trade Area in order to deepen value chains amongst the developing countries, sharing technologies and expanding market access would be extremely beneficial. Now, in my earlier slide, I spoke about tariff escalations and that developing countries must address it by creating diversification strategies that are coupled with a better understanding of international quality standards and market dynamics. Lastly, and perhaps the most important, is international cooperation in the form of tailored financial and technical support from the developed world to help meet these complex due diligence requirements imposed by new unilateral trade measures, which will again be an important consideration moving forward. So, yeah, thank you so much, Avantika.
Thanks so much, Rudrat. So this paper is going to be available on CSE's website shortly. It has a number of interesting case studies on various experiments that various global south countries have tried to move up the value chain and just not focus on raw commodity dependence. So I encourage you to read them. I'm now going to invite my colleague Seher Raheja to walk us through the next paper, which is focused on critical minerals, but from, again, a very specific lens where we focus on value addition, moving up the value chain, and capturing more benefit from a country's natural critical mineral resources. So, Seher, over to you.
Thank you, Avantika. We can go to the next slide, please. So for considering the question and the similar question of how developing countries can move up the value chain in the case of critical minerals, we began by examining what the scope of our paper should be. So critical minerals like copper, lithium, nickel, and rare earth elements were the selection for our study because a bulk of their demand in the projected years until 2040 is to be driven by clean energy related end-use applications. So we see these as central to the transition for the entire world and for decarbonization on the whole. There are several differences in who houses the resources of these four minerals and who captures value at different stages. So first, we've examined the revenue from export of raw copper versus processed copper. As you can see in the graphs given here, Chile houses and exports 30% of raw copper and only 12% of processed copper, gets only 12% of a global share of revenue from processed copper, whereas Australia gets around 76% from the export of raw lithium, with China processing 23% and getting revenue from 23% of the global share. Similarly, Indonesia for nickel, it controls 60% of the mined nickel and revenue that is gained from exporting it. But China, Japan, they refine about 75% of it still. If we can go to the next slide, please. What I mentioned on the previous slide has been shown visually in these graphs. So we can actually go to the next slide, please. Then we wanted to examine how the concentration in the supply chain at different stages for each of these four minerals is distributed. So if you can see in the first graph on the left, in the case of copper, Chile, Peru, and Australia together hold 41% of reserves. This means the quantity of mineable copper that is present within their boundaries. But China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Chile produce 48% of raw copper. That is, they do the mining and they control most of the extraction from the ground, with 62% of processing being controlled by them as well, with China alone accounting for 44%. In the case of lithium, again, Chile, Australia, and Argentina, they hold 68% of global reserves, with Australia, China, and Chile mining 77% of supply. But China dominates the processing by a significant amount, approximately 70% compared to the global totals. So this is a sign or a clear reflection of a major supply side dominance and dependence. Next slide, please. Similarly, for the other two minerals that we examined, that is nickel and rare earth elements. In the case of nickel, as you can see, Indonesia, Australia, and Brazil together hold 72% of global reserves, with Indonesia, Philippines, and Russia producing 77% of the mined nickel, the second stage in the supply chain that we've considered, and China and Japan lead the refining, amounting to a total of 77% of global output. And lastly, in the case of rare earth elements, China holds 40% of the reserves itself and produces 59% of mined rare earth elements and controls over 91% of processing. This is a significant dominance, as was mentioned at the start by ma'am as well. So the top three countries in the case of rare earths, they account for about almost all of the rare earth elements in terms of refining in the world. And these are China, Malaysia, and the US. But China in there has a far more significant dominance and is a strong holder at that end of the supply chain for rare earths. So essentially, by examining all of this data, the point that we've reached is understood was that mineral reserves lie largely in developing countries, but a majority of refining and processing remains concentrated in China or a few developed nations. Then the latter are those which capture more value in the global supply chains. So could we go to the next slide, please? But what is being done about this supply chain concentration? There are global partnerships from the West and the global North that are attempting to break this Chinese stronghold. So two crucial ones that we examined are the USA's Mineral Security Partnership and the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act. So the Mineral Security Partnership is attempting to link public and private finance to diversify mining and refining projects with an emphasis on high ESG standards for sourcing. Traceability concerns also come in here. Whereas the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act has set a 2030 target of ensuring that 10% of extraction, 40% of processing, and 25% of recycling of critical minerals must be done from within the EU by 2030 in order to strengthen their domestic and domestic supply chain as well as their internationally partnered value chains. But there is also potential for South-South cooperation that is emerging, as we have seen. For example, countries in South America and Africa are forming different types of alliances or partnerships to try and increase the value that is retained locally. So Argentina and Chile signed or agreed to a binational lithium and salt flats working group. There have been talks of a lithium OPEC within the South American region as well, which includes Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. And the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia recently signed Zambia Battery Council recently signed an agreement for increasing joint battery production through the creation of industrial zones. And the financial backing for this came from the Afrexim Bank and UN ECA. So these initiatives are trying to seek cooperation at the regional level and to leverage the different expertise that different South countries have in order to increase the value that they can capture while also investing in human capital formation, safeguarding environmental and social standards by setting up more industrial zones aligned with their national goals. At the multilateral level, there has been a push for embedding ethics and justice in the way that the critical minerals, race for critical minerals for the green transition is carried out. So the United Nations Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, it specifies the need to center human rights safeguards, ecosystem protections, and responsible finance and local value addition to ensure that the countries where that house the minerals that are critical for the energy transition actually benefit from their production as well more in the coming years. And civil society has also been advocating at the multilateral level to turn these justice and ethics principles into binding laws or accountable frameworks in the years to come. Next slide, please. After this, we also did a comparative assessment of different mineral-rich global south countries, namely the Democratic Republic of Congo, Indonesia, and Chile. So we conducted a SWOT analysis and found that through absolutely different strategic national level policies, each of these countries with different levels of natural resource endowment have different strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'll just give you a quick snapshot here in the interest of time, but the paper details each of these much, much more. So for the strengths, we know that there is a strong and growing global demand for cobalt because of its use in clean technologies. And Congo has an overwhelming amount of that natural resource endowment. And it has been exercising autonomy over its natural endowments as well. For instance, they placed a temporary export ban in February just this year to handle the oversupply and price volatility issue. Indonesia also has a large resource base, the case of nickel, and it has that leverage as the largest producer of now not just raw but refined nickel as well. Their export ban policy has successfully pulled capital into domestic processing. But on the weaknesses, we found that despite the availability of resources, Congo has low profit margins that are being captured domestically from the value chain, because this is also reflected by the fact that China actually controls 8 out of the 14 largest mines in the DRC. And economic dependence on a singular commodity makes their economy really vulnerable to price sensitivity and external shocks. Indonesia has seen uneven value addition across sectors. So when they conducted their banning the export of raw nickel, their stainless steel industry grew exponentially, but the EV battery sector lagged because they were not able to prioritize both. Chile, on the other hand, has been unable to move up the value chain significantly for lithium, and they have not been encouraging, or they haven't created an environment for more private sector investment, missing out on potential revenue maximization. Next slide, please. When we look at the opportunities that these example countries have, the Congo has the potential for developing local processing through a more coherent and cohesive industrial policy. Indonesia can climb the EV battery value chain through more international collaboration and opening up its domestic policy to more investment from outside. Chile, on the other hand, can boost lithium and go up the value chain given its high natural resource endowment through effective governance and increasing their resource nationalist policies. But there are threats to each of these countries at different points in these supply chains as well. We know that the Congo has been facing severe internal safety and political instability challenges for some time now. In Indonesia, the social and environmental costs of mining have been apparent in recent years. Even though there is a growth factor, the socio-environmental impacts on the ground have also been highlighted by several people. Whereas Chile, the water-intensive nature of lithium extraction has led to a lot of environmental justice concern and impacts on local communities in the Atacama. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Where do we then go, given the fact that value is captured by different countries, despite different values captured less by developing countries and countries of the global south, despite having the potential for climbing up that value chain? What can be done? So we highlight 5 key areas in our paper for the way forward. Number one, the trade rules of the current global trade order need to be changed and be made fit for purpose. So as in the case of agricultural commodities and forests, as Rudrat was mentioning earlier, there are examples of tariff escalation that are placed on developing countries wanting to export value-added products related to each of these minerals as opposed to raw materials as well. This needs to change. This is just one example of the different kind of trade barriers that the global south is still facing. Number two, we think that there is a need to push for sufficiency as the leading principle, especially in the global north. So this emphasizes reducing the overall material demand and not just improving efficiency in production and critical mineral usage, but to also stay and focus on smaller, longer lasting products mass public mobility as opposed to individual electric SUVs for each person, and focusing on probably even introducing consumption caps in high income regions in order to cut the pressure on critical mineral extraction in the global south and ensure equity is at the heart of the green transition. Number three, recycling. Recycling is emerging as a recommendation throughout the papers and research that we have seen as well, because it's essential for building both economic resilience and reducing dependence on new mining in the critical mineral value chain. One study, for instance, shows that 42 developing countries and 31 developed countries could recover more minerals than they currently import critical minerals with advanced recycling methods in place. So by embedding recycling into national strategies, countries can secure mineral supplies and cut environmental impacts and get greater value in the global transition as well. And lastly, number four, more regional cooperation. So as was mentioned for the previous paper, this will enable developing countries to climb up the value chain by pooling their resources, leveraging the different benefits and advantages that they have, including finance and technology. One example is the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, which aims to create a unified market and attract investment for the processing and refining in the African region. And lastly, economic diversification applies in the case of critical minerals as well. This can enable developing countries to move beyond raw mineral exports into processing, refining, and downstream manufacturing, such as machinery, and also expanding industrial linkages, such as to machinery, logistics, and services. So countries can reduce their exposure to volatile price shocks and generate higher value jobs and revenues for their people and communities. So I will stop there and hand back to Avantika. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Seher. And this paper as well will be available on our website shortly. And just to kind of wrap up the series, I invite my colleague Tushant Dev to talk about our third paper on clean technology manufacturing, which is a paper about green industrialization and green industrial policy. And in this paper, we explore how developing countries can even consider participating in clean technology supply chains. It's not advocating for every country to produce solar panels or every country to produce electric vehicles, but definitely to capture some of the benefits in this emerging new clean technology manufacturing race. So Trishant, over to you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. The third paper in this series begins with a challenge that the Global South faces. We call it the double-barrel challenge, that is to undergo structural industrialization for economic prosperity, and having to do so while there is a need to decarbonize the economy and to meet climate commitments. And to this end, we focus on what that means in practice, and that is to scale up clean manufacturing. Clean technology manufacturing in this paper refers to the technologies that are critical for the energy transition. For example, manufacturing of solar panels, batteries, wind energy technology equipments, electric vehicles, and so on. And to scale this kind of technology manufacturing and meet the needs of the market domestically, we have to reckon with the reality. And that brings me to China. Can we go to the next slide? Of the nearly $235 billion investment that happened in 2023, 75% of the investments in the clean technology manufacturing sector went to China. It holds about 75% of the new investment, 84.6% of solar PV production, and massively dominates every other sector in this regard. And this has happened through years of building on consistent government policies related to tax cuts, subsidies, investments in research and development. And now this is being followed by the rich world, which is trying to, bring up their own policies which are subsidy rich, which are experimenting with different kinds of tools to build up their own manufacturing sector. But this subsidy race is a race that most developing countries cannot join. There are asymmetries that persist, which brings me to the next slide. Meeting growth in this regard means that countries have to do three things at once. Now, they have to build massive new power capacities. They have to also clean up their energy mix, and they also have to keep their electricity affordable. And to do all of that, they face several challenges. The most prominent would be finance, which is prohibitive. The weighted average cost of capital is 2 to 3 times higher in developing countries versus the advanced countries. Uh, to top all of this, the global trade regime restricts the policy space for these countries to protect their markets or even to promote domestic manufacturing. In the left side, we have given a landscape of what has happened through a set of graphs. If you see, long period of industrialization for the developed world has been accompanied by high historical emissions, but the developing world cannot afford to do so. They have to do it in a constricted space. And these advanced economies have, as a result, got bigger, deeper, and more sophisticated. But the technological capabilities, there is a wide gap between the technological capabilities of developed and developing countries, and we have used a set of metrics to represent that: the innovation index, or the revenues generated by IP, and the patent filings that countries have done on clean energy technologies. And then we represent how the finance question is really the important question here, where we see that the weighted average cost of capital is high, and the spending space is low for developing countries. Can we go to the next slide? And we present this through a set of case studies, and we look at how different countries are following strategic paths and in specific sectors. And the paper goes into the detail of each country in a specific sector. So for China, the EV industry has really boomed, and that has been through years of spending. A massive $230 billion subsidy in the sector has resulted in it completely decimating EV manufacturing in other parts of the world. We have the case of India's solar manufacturing, the PLI scheme, and how it has fared, what kind of progress it has made, and what are still lacking. For instance, India has over 118 gigawatts of solar manufacturing capacity, but most of that is module manufacturing. There is very less cell manufacturing, around 27, 28 gigawatts, and very even lesser ingots and wafer manufacturing, that's around 2.2 gigawatts. So the sector still lacks in that and has to depend on import from China for this. Then there is Mexico's auto industry, which has really thrived on a regional export market, which it finds in the US. But then most of the industry is kind of an assembly industry, and the domestic value add is very low. There is not deepening of industry within Mexico. And then the case of Indonesia, which banned the export of nickel, which helped the country increase the value add, and the nickel exports jumped. But all of this came at the backs of Chinese investments and heavy reliance on China for technologies within Indonesia. Next slide. So we have different learnings from these countries. As I just said, for China, it is the demonstration that the success of large-scale persistent state intervention has given it a massive advantage in certain sectors. And Mexico shows benefits and limits of export-oriented integration. Indonesia has resource nationalism, which enables downstreaming, but deep Chinese dependence poses strategic and environmental risks. Can we go to the next slide? So we follow with a broad set of needs for the countries. They have, first of all, a strategic path to choose from, actually a set of strategic paths to choose from. They can insert themselves in the existing global value chains, like how Vietnam has tried to do. But that has meant that even though Vietnam has been manufacturing a lot, the domestic value add is still restricted. So there is not deepening of industries within Vietnam. So that is a model, and that is the risk of the model. Then countries can also follow an autonomous or a semi-autonomous kind of industrial policy where they try to build their own manufacturing ecosystems and try to fulfill the domestic demand. But this requires huge fiscal capacity to do so. To an extent, China has done that. To a large extent, in fact, China has done that, and it's quite difficult for developing countries to catch up to that level. Uh, they also need to navigate the dependencies that have been created. It's very important to bring in the China question here. Uh, uh, how do these countries negotiate fairer tech transfer if they are dependent on China for their imports? And how do they set the localization terms? We know China has recently taken India to WTO, filed a WTO complaint against India's EV manufacturing domestic value add policy. So these kinds of dependencies have to be confronted. And what would also be needed for them would be to push collectively for reform of the multilateral system, both in terms of trade and climate. And we go into some of the details of this in the report. And I think that would be all from my side. Thank you, Avantika.
Thank you so much, Trishant, and to all of my colleagues. So I think we have taken you through a lot of information, and there are very detailed case studies in all of the three reports that we hope that you go through and get back to us for further engagement. But just to summarize some of our broad, I would say, macro level takeaways, as well as some of the politics of how to move forward with some of these ideas. So across the three papers, what has been our lens and our kind of mission is to state that developing countries cannot be left behind in the new green economy. In the case of agricultural and forest commodities, we are seeing low value exports and a massive vulnerability to climate shocks and price vulnerability. In the case of critical minerals, we are seeing extractive roles being played by poor and developing countries, but not much value addition and processing. Most of the processing is done by major industrial powers like China. In the case of clean technology manufacturing, some developing countries are making efforts, as the case study showed, but they face massive barriers to scaling up clean tech manufacturing. So they need to definitely domestically experiment with new forms of green industrial policy, but a lot of global changes like reform of global trade rules and more international support is needed to enable this. But the bottom line really is that the developing countries of the world essentially are supplying the world's resources, but capturing too little of the value. And as a result, the green transition that we are moving into or are currently in the middle of is repeating old patterns of extraction and dependence, whether we're talking about cocoa or copper or even solar cells and electric vehicles. Additionally, policies that have been announced recently, unilateral trade measures such as the EU deforestation regulation or the carbon border adjustment mechanism, they can actually perpetuate some of these inequalities. So we need to really address this question of how fairness can be built into the future green economy. So in conclusion, we need to bring together the question of climate action and development, asking for simply decarbonisation without economic resilience, value addition is no longer viable. There are multiple structural inequalities, inequities in global manufacturing and trade systems. But successful, equitable green industrialization is possible. It needs to be a more central issue in the climate agenda with the focus on diversification, localization, and control over countries' resources. And this is really where collective developing country agency and coalitions will be very important to really demand that there are fairer trade rules, that technology transfer happens, that climate finance is available for enabling this kind of green industrialization. So these are very broad and very lofty goals, but this is the conversation that we really want to move towards. And we really hope that we can continue having these discussions with all of you. With that, I'll stop my presentation and hand it back over to Sunita ma'am.
Thank you, Avantika. Thank you, Trishant, Rudrat, and Seher. This is really interesting work, new work that I hope we can get the conversation going on. Now, I have one question from Shweta. Shweta, please do write to us. We will see what is the best we can do. And thank you so much for your words of encouragement. Happy that you read us. Happy that you find our work useful. Now, in terms of where you find India is moving ahead, I think, India is following many of these strategies at the domestic level. What we believe is not happening is the linking of many of these domestic strategies with what we need to look at when it comes to climate change. So when you look at the climate change action plan of countries like India, they are very locked in terms of the ideas that are there. And a lot of the work that a country like India is doing, for instance, I'll give you a very simple example. We are doing a lot of work on electrification of our railway system, electrification of our public transport system, electric buses. But that's not so central as part of our NDC as is the question of electric cars. And that's because globally, the question has really been about electric cars. And I think it's important for us to reimagine these solutions, link them to our development strategies, and put forward the pathway that work for us. And that's really what we believe also needs to happen through the continent of, say, Africa. The incredible work that we have seen just now or heard just now, where we want to really confront this reality to say, here are resource commodity dependent countries, but they are not benefiting from it. Why is that reimagining of the trade rules not as central to the NDC as is, say, the need to stop deforestation? We need to stop deforestation, yes, but we are not going to get there unless we can reimagine the economic resilience of countries, give them more benefits from the natural wealth that they have. So that, I think, is really where we are looking to see what can happen. We hope that our conversation will help countries rethink, rework their priorities. And we also hope that all this will help us to keep climate change centered in global policy, in national policy. We are extremely worried as civil society, as people who understand the existential threat of climate change, the hesitancy that we are seeing globally. We are very worried that climate change agenda is becoming an agenda which is getting linked to many other agendas, like which are then turning public against them. We need the global public, to stay committed to climate change action. And that's really why we have presented this. Avantika, before I finish and close the discussion for today, I was thinking maybe if you could give us a quick recap to all the people here in terms of what then is also the agenda at Belém and COP30 as you see it. And do you see any way that some of these conversations that we are having today can get linked? And I will ask all of you if there are any comments that you have before I wrap up this very interesting session. Avantika.
Sure. So, I mean, 100%, I think every issue that is being discussed at the COP, in the COP process, has links to all of these issues. It's a question of whether these are raised enough in the priority. So I think I'll start with the main thing that you just highlighted, which is how can you ensure public commitment and acceptance of so many of these climate policies and the larger issue of decarbonization. Decarbonization is always presented as an added cost. It's presented as a penalty. And there's always scrutiny of developing countries at COP forums about why more decarbonization is not being done, why higher mitigation targets are not being set. But centering this question of economic resilience and value addition along with decarbonization is what will help these ideas endure, as opposed to them just being top down impositions from a global elite community. And really thinking about what is the economic future of countries that are being asked to completely decarbonize their entire economy. So I think amplifying these issues within COP processes, such as whether it's mitigation, whether it's just transition, very clear links to COP processes like finance, of course, I think is really going to make this a much more compelling pathway forward for developing countries who just feel completely shortchanged in the global climate regime otherwise, because they're like, we did not cause this problem, but we are being, placed under this demand to just phase out all of our fossil incumbent energy with no viable, cost-effective alternatives. So I think that is my main reading of how this fits into the COP narratives. And we are going to definitely be trying to amplify these very structural issues at Belém in the next 2 weeks.
Wonderful. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, it's really what I keep saying. We're always got our back against the wall and in terms of these negotiations, and we feel we are cornered. And that is not a good way for the world to have cooperation, because if 70% of the world's people really feel that they are unwilling participants and they are just being, they don't have an equal say in how they can build their economies and decarbonize, then you will not get the kind of ambitious action moving forward. So I think that's really where I also see that these ideas will give the developing countries a sense, of the countries of the South, a sense of their stake, their priorities being center to the issues as we move ahead. And they're very, very powerful in terms of being able to ask to have a greater stake in the negotiations. And I think that's really what we want to see more and more. Seher, Trishant, and Rudrat, would you like to add to this point of Avantika's very important point?
Yes, maybe I can add a little more to that. So one of the important tracks that is emerging in the COP process is also the question of trade. Recently, developing countries have been highlighting the issue of unilateral trade measures. And that is where our paper is also relevant in terms of when we talk about where are these issues to be taken up, because there is a conversation around whether unilateral trade measures are to be dealt at WTO, whether unilateral trade measures can be dealt at UNFCCC. So there's a real gap that exists. Where can we discuss the issues that are emerging on this? And I think to some extent, our papers tries to address some of these issues. Thank you.
But I think, Trishant, we do more than that. And I hope that you will also, we can now have this conversation, because as you know, the Brazilian government has put forward a proposal for a permanent forum on the question of trade and climate change and unilateral trade measures. But I think what, again, I would argue is that till now, the countries of the South are just saying no, no, no. And I think what this does is to present a positive agenda for us to move ahead. Because the question of higher tariffs on value addition on goods is not presented as powerfully as the idea of no to EUDR. So yes, we do, the question of European Union's deforestation regulation has been contested by many countries of the South, particularly in Africa, saying it only imposes a higher cost on them. I don't think they have had enough space to be able to argue back to say, well, what we really need to do with our forest and our natural resources is to get a higher value for that so that we get more wealth in our countries, and that allows us to be able to protect the forests that remain. And that's, I think, got to be part of the discussion as it's moved forward. Because when I look at the trade and environment and climate change discussion, it has really been about how to increase the environmental standards, the labor standards, and that, yes, is important. But given the entire trade regime is designed to have lowered standards because you want to drive costs down of manufacturing, it really is, it's like it's a two-headed hydra issue. So I think this point is very important. And again, I would urge you, and we should all work together and make sure that these papers reach people who are going to be discussing these in the trade and climate change forums. And we want governments to be able to present a more positive view moving forward so that we have a better stake. Avantika, you have your hand up on this?
No, I just wanted to completely agree with the point about having a positive framing. I think it's 100% it's a positive framing, but it's also a set of it's a constructive agenda and a set of demands because I mean, when you're already in a subordinate position in so many places, as one of our graphics, we try to show how we are low on manufacturing value added, we have high financing costs, we have extremely low government revenues as share of GDP as developing countries. You are already subordinate in so many systems of the world. And now you're kind of being asked to take on additional costs of decarbonization with no questions asked. So I think, as you said, I think I would completely agree. The developing countries have typically been defensive on a lot of this, but I feel like this really gives a positive agenda to say, well, now we will proceed with building out green industry, but we demand more localization. We demand that we get technology transfer in new deals with, let's say, China or with other powers who hold technology. We demand that we actually can move up and capture value from processed products and not just raw commodities. So just wanted to echo that 100% it's a constructive agenda.
Thank you. And I think, Mekanon, you have asked us a very good question on how these will influence and what are the issues, how they link to the issues in Belém. And I think that's really what you can hear from Avantika, and you can hear that the issue of finance is there, the issue of trade is there, the issue of mitigation is there, decarbonization is there. I think what we are presenting here is an agenda for the South, that we believe in climate change. We want to act on climate change, but we need the resources to act. Until now, we have only asked you for finances, which you have given us with a number of conditionalities. You have also given us finances which have really been added to our indebtedness because they've come as equity and not as low concessional finance. What we are really demanding now is that we need to make sure that we can grow economically. We can have that the trade rules globally are changed so that they give us more strength to be able to grow with our own resources. So we do want reparation funds. We do want the North to pay for the transition, but we also want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. And for that, we want to have more value addition in our countries. We want to get a greater stake in being able to develop the resources that we have. So I think that's the conversation that we are hoping. It's complicated. It's not as simple as saying this, but I know from all the comments that I can see in the chat box that you understand what we are saying. You understand that this is really about arguing about building that new green world together, and that we cannot have 70% of the world without access to energy, access to resources, and yet have a secure future. a climate secure future and an economic secure future. So that's really what we are talking about and presenting. So thank you, everyone. Unless anyone else has any burning questions, I'm going to end this here because we've had a very, very interesting discussion. And I'm really grateful to all the people who've been listening in to us and for their comments and their support and their words of encouragement. And we will keep at it, and we look forward to staying in touch with all of you because this is an agenda that is not going to go away. Climate change impacts are growing, and we need to find answers, and we need to find them, answers that work for us. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.